Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm super excited to be here. Just to kind of get a read of the room, what years do we have in here? Is this a mixed bag? Mixed? Okay. And has anyone had any internships yet? Back here. Any positions with any firms? Right there, okay. Great. So I'll start by giving you a little bit about my background and how I became so interested in this topic of design and leadership. I graduated with a master's in architecture from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, which is also where I grew up about 10 years ago. And I had done my undergrad in global studies, and I've always had a fascination for understanding people, how people think, how people work. And I pretty quickly got interested in not only the design, but how the design gets done and the humanity of design. So I started, when I came to the Bay Area about 10 years ago, one of the first things I did was I was the project manager for the Bay Lights project, which is the art installation on the Bay Bridge. Has anyone seen that from the Embarcadero? Yes. Good. If you haven't, it's a must-see. Which was an incredible project to be a part of, really transformed my mentality about what is possible. As you can imagine, we'll talk more about that later, but that was a project that kind of defied a lot of reality and rules, and now is a big part of our of the fabric of our city. So I went on to project manage with Restoration Hardware, and from there have had several leadership positions in design firms you may know of. As you mentioned, Ken Folk, which does fantastic work here in San Francisco and is now in New York. Avrico, which is headquartered in New York but has a studio here in San Francisco. Really focused on hospitality design, which tends to have a lot of moving parts and a lot of players and a lot of coordination amongst all of those people. So throughout my career, I've developed some tools that I believe really help in aligning people, keeping people inspired and motivated and thinking and looking at things differently. And I would urge you to think about leadership as a mentality and a mindset and not as a position. There are a lot of people in leadership positions with titles that may not have leadership qualities and vice versa. So even starting your career as an intern, as a junior designer, anyone can embody leadership qualities. And it really has been a big differentiator for me in my career, helping me get to places that I can really shape projects in a way that's very impactful. So a little bit about what is design leadership? What does that even mean? Leadership is kind of a buzzword now. We're hearing a lot more talk about it. But essentially, design leaders are people who, when all is shifting, which it does constantly on these projects, and there's a lot of unknown, they're kind of the beacons of clarity and bring purpose for the team, so everyone knows where they're going. It's the ability to create and realize inspiring solutions, especially in the face of complex or changing situations. And I think of it as equally strategic as it is intuitive. So really kind of tapping into your gut instinct is a really big part of bringing leadership to projects. And why does it matter? As a leader, you are creating a framework for which designers can orient their thoughts, their practice, and their process. And it's about inspiring and aligning a team while steering the design towards the best possible outcome, which is really the goal for everyone. I like to emphasize just on this is design is not this like free-for-all, and it's not magic. Sometimes people think it just happens, and it happens through great ideas, but that's a really, really small part of it. The success of a project is just really dependent on the process and the way in which you navigate that process and the different perspectives that are invited to the table. It's got a lot of different moving parts. So I think great leadership really is about asking the right questions, inviting in these different points of view, encouraging people to flip ideas on their head, looking at the unknown, and it just makes for a more meaningful and rich outcome. So just for anyone who you know, hasn't really been in a design firm and understand how design firms are structured, typically these are the positions that you'll find in a design firm. And there's more or less, but some of the leadership positions can be a managing director, a studio director, which tend to be more on the operations of the whole studio, and then a creative director and design director, which tends to be more project-based. Sometimes you'll have a project manager and the designers, but oftentimes the designers are expected to bring project management skills. Depends on the size of the firm and the way that it's structured, but having some kind of, I call them project leadership skills, and I'll explain a little more why I choose that language, but those skills will be really important in you kind of differentiating yourself in a firm. So I don't believe that leadership is about management. I don't really think people like to be managed. I think people like to be inspired and led. And so I change my language. Anytime I structure a team, I call it a project leadership position. I think it can be a lot more than task lists and schedule management and budgets, which tend to sound a little dry, and everyone runs away from that responsibility. I think of it as being informed, and as an informed designer, you can make better decisions. And anyone can develop leadership skills. So again, this is not for a position, this is for anyone in this room. And so here I'm just going to share with you 10 different fundamental truths that throughout my career I feel like have been really impactful in design leadership. I'll also say, so there's 10 points, and you'll see each one is numbered, so they're really clear. At the end of each one, I'll pause, and if you have questions, just shoot your hand up. I want to keep it conversational, and I want to make sure this is clear. At the same time, some of these might not even feel relevant right now for where you're at, but if you have questions or need examples, just shoot your hand up. And I hope, for me, sometimes when I hear something, it just sits in the back of your head, and at the right moment, at the right time, when you're on a project, maybe that will pop up and be useful to you at that point. So the first one here is one of my favorites, which I really believe in, is that authentic leadership comes from your values. Values shape design. It's the key to purposeful and connected creative work, and ultimately, I believe, how you create inspired spaces. So when you're on a project, I always ask the team, what is the point of doing this? Spaces impact people, and why do we create the spaces that we do? An example of this is, if you value social equity, then accessibility is going to be important on your project, which means that it has a price of entry or a price point in which most people can afford to come. So that value starts shaping the design decisions. It's going to affect your budget, and through there, it's going to affect the material selection and all of the design decisions you make thereafter. So it starts with the value, and then the design follows that. Yes?
Can you just, like, very briefly give us a breakdown of, like, what the process is? Because we have a creative director and a design director, and so I'm thinking, when do the designers come in? Like, what's the process of the beginning? Say you get the client, and then a creative director does what, and then the designers do what?
Sure, okay. Good,
Process.
good question. It's different for every firm, but I'll tell you a process. Yes, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, what is the process? You're awarded a project, and how does that kind of funnel through the different positions, and what is the role of the designer within the project? So I'll tell you kind of how most often I prefer a project to go. So oftentimes there is a lot of work that's going into win projects on behalf of the firm. And that is usually the managing director, or I would use creative director and design director interchangeably. Usually that's one and the same. And the principal of the company will be out pitching for work, which means you might do a little work before you win the work. And you're sharing your ideas, you're talking about your process, your team. Someone says, great, we want to hire you, you're going to work on our project. One of the first things that I think is really important, and I'll talk more about it later, is doing a project kickoff. So the creative director or the design director is really there to form the vision for the design and to ensure that everyone stays aligned with that vision throughout the process. And so in those initial phases of the project, they're going to be helping the entire team kind of orient around what's the framework for this project? What's the budget? What's the schedule? Who are the clients? What are their goals? Who's the audience? Who's going to be coming to this? Now, obviously, residential, my background is in hospitality, so I tend to think a bit broader about the audience, but it's the same for residential. Who's living there? What do they like to do? Do they have kids? So you're taking all this information in, and through that intake, you're starting to formulate kind of parameters to design within, because designing on a blank slate is like one of the worst things to, I think it's too open-ended. You need some kind of boundaries to then start saying, okay, now this is the sandbox we're going to play in. So a creative director or design director is helping to start to shape that. The managing director can also play a role in helping set up those early stages of the project. And then from there, projects are generally broken into phases. And I'll have a slide in here, so I'll wait to go through that so you can see the different phases of a project. But the designers might be engaged through every phase. You might come in just for concept and schematic, and then someone else might take it through design development. So that's where it's different firm to firm. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to give these young minds an idea of what they might be experiencing first thing if they get into a firm.
Yeah, yeah. So generally, you are going to be one of many on a large team, or it could be a smaller team. It depends on the scale of the project. But I'll show you through this kind of how to help get clarity on what your role is on the project. So I just threw this example in. I actually just got back from Oaxaca 2 days ago. And this, I thought, was such a great example of how values drive design. So this restaurant, Criollo, was designed by Javier Sanchez, who's a pretty notable architect in Mexico. Beautiful restaurant, was really impressed with the design. But when you walk in, one of the things you see in the very beginning, basically where the hostess stand would be, is this beautiful area where they're preparing food and making tortillas. And so one of their values is the artistry of Oaxacan cuisine. And so they're not going to miss a moment for that. You walk in and you're immediately immersed in the food preparation. And throughout the restaurant, there's these sorts of displays where you're really engaged in the process, and you can see all of the ingredients on display. To me, this says, okay, they value the art of their cuisine, of culinary, of the culinary arts, and they're sharing it with you. If you didn't, the kitchen might be in the back somewhere that you're never going to get to go into, and you'll never see any of the ingredients until it's on your plate. So you can see how these kind of nuances of being really clear about what you value and what you want to share with your customer or with your audience really drives even the layout and the floor plan. So I'll pause there for a second just as this kind of sinks in. Is there does this prompt any, what do you, like, values that you have and how those might be shaping some of the projects that you're working on? Anyone have any they can think of or coming to mind?
So one big value that we talk about a lot in the classes is sustainability. And on, I think, pretty much everybody's mind, or it should be. But we find that in the professional world, you're often driven by budgets.
Yes.
And sustainability kind of takes the back seat. Have you had any experience how to drive that point forward, a real essential value to a designer, and how they can get a client inspired and get behind that vision?
Yeah. So the question is, if sustainability is a value, how to really get the client supportive and inspired by that, bringing value to the project. It's a tricky one. It is one of those things it's talked a lot about in theory. And sometimes projects want to have LEED certification because it's either required or it's going to add some kind of value proposition to the project. I think it's really in the nuances of how it gets executed. And so sometimes it doesn't even have to be that overt that they have to buy into it. If you as a designer, if that's important to you, build your network and your resources around that. There's a lot of people doing great sustainable practices in craftsmanship and in furniture making and in all these ways that don't have to be as grand as kind of this big vision for the project, and bring those resources to the table because they're people you believe in and you believe in the work that they're doing. Your resources become very important as a designer. I mean, no firm is going to hand those to you. They have people that they like to work with, but everyone wants to work with someone new. So the more you can say, hey, you know what, I know someone who's doing really great work. They're, supporting local women, or they're using local materials, and I think this would be a great resource for the project. That's hugely valuable to the team. So my second here is creativity is emotional, no matter what anyone says, that it tends to kind of hit us at our core. And emotional intelligence is, the use of thoughts and feelings and intuition to help solve problems. And I think it is one of the most important qualities of a leader and as a creative. It's a huge compass for us in how we make our decisions. So, don't think of leadership as like the boss or the decision maker, but think of it as like, you're kind of an intuitive pilot who's helping get the plane off the ground and helping landing it. And along the way, when there's turbulence, you're just trying to keep things smooth enough so that the designers can do what they do. That's how I like to think about what the role of leadership is within a project. And so emotional intelligence is, your self-awareness, knowing what you value, your self-regulation, holding yourself accountable, which is a really big one on a project. You hold yourself accountable, other people don't have to do it for you. That's a huge win. Empathy, being able to put yourself in someone else's position, hugely important as we have to kind of think about our audience and our customers outside of ourselves. Ultimately, if they are not liking the project or they're not approving it, then you're not able to move forward. And collaborative communication, so just sincerely communicating in a way that's considerate of others. These things become hugely important on projects. You get better team engagement. You have a better company culture, more creative problem solving, and just higher productivity. Yes? I think you just should lead through example. You really, you can't change people, which is why this kind of becomes so much about yourself and your own practice and, how you create an environment of the qualities that you want to see in others. And oftentimes, people gravitate towards that. So the toxic behavior tends to create a lot of, ruffle a lot of feathers. Everyone moves away from that. So the more you're exemplifying this behavior, the more effective you're going to be, and then that just automatically puts you in a position where people are paying more attention. Any other questions on that?
I wanted to add something to the
Yeah.
emotional intelligence and the communication part. I think there's a word that I teach my students, honesty.
Yeah.
Being honest with what's going on. I know a lot of young designers, they're emotionally, maybe will shut down a little bit and maybe not reveal the problems they're having, which creates problems down the line. So a good leader is just brutally honest
Mm-hmm.
with the people they're working with and expects the same. So I just was thinking of how much honesty is a part of that.
It is. Honesty is a very important part of it. And honesty just requires vulnerability. And so don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Like I said, this is an emotional practice. It's a personal practice. And, one of the number one things when I've hired countless students out of this school and out of other design schools who come in as junior designers, and they're just so excited to be there, but one of the number one things I'm saying is we want to hear more of you. Share your opinions, speak up, engage in the process, ask questions. You're there for a reason, so you have to put yourself out there. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And so my number 3 here is the project is the process. This sounds simple, but when you really let it sink in, the end result is the sum of thousands of small decisions that you make along the way. You can't go back in time and make different decisions. So what you get in the end is just the result of all of those decisions you've been making for the past year. So as those decisions come up, realize that those really do have impact, and how you navigate through the process is really what's going to get you to the end. If you have a high conflict process and a high conflict team, it's very hard to have a really positive outcome at the end. So the process is all of these things, especially the nature of work that you're all going to be doing. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not quick. This is generally projects are, 6 months to a year to 3 years, sometimes 5 years. And it changes constantly. So it can be really exciting one minute, can be incredibly frustrating the next. It can be really boring at times. I mean, if anyone, I guess probably not, but when you get to the CA phase, which is the construction admin, and you're just answering a bunch of RFIs from architects, and it's boring. And I've had so many times people go, oh my God, I can't be in this phase another minute, and just say, it'll pass. It will pass. It's somewhat meditative. You just have to get through it. If you love the concept phase and you hate that phase, just know and communicate that with your with the whoever is staffing the projects, so that people know kind of the right dose of phase to put you on per project. So just be prepared and just know that it passes. Enjoy the good moments. Be patient in the bad ones. Don't get discouraged if you have a horrible day or someone hates your idea or you failed, in something. It's fine. You have to be vulnerable. You have to put yourself out there. That means you're going to fail. And the next day is fresh and it's new and everyone forgets and is on to the next thing. So also, this is just hugely, hugely important. One of the biggest parts of design are the relationships that you have. Really value and cultivate them. This is not an individual sport. It is a team sport. If you like to put your head down and just do your own thing and not interact with people, it might be tough. It's truly one of those things where you need to work within a larger group and find a way to do that works for you. Just to give you kind of a sense of how many people can be involved in a project, you can have a client. That client probably has a project manager. If it's anything that's public, like a restaurant or a hotel, it's got an operator. There's someone who's financing the project. There might be an engineer. There's an architect. There might be multiple architects. Could be a landscape designer, an interior designer, a branding agency, a contractor or multiple contractors and their subcontractors. So you can see now how quick projects grow and grow and grow. And all these people have different objectives, different points of view. And so with a leadership mentality, you really are hearing all of these different points of view, all of the conflicting needs, and trying to find something that aligns all of these individuals that for the most part meets their needs without compromising too much. So you can see kind of the challenge in that. It's easier to maintain relationships and build relationships than to repair them. So be gentle. And if a relationship does need to be repaired, just do it right away, which means just have the tough conversations and get things back on track. There's nothing worse than having conflict with someone on a project because they'll make your life a living hell. And it's, they don't have to do what you say. You want them to want to do what you'd like. So don't fight with your contractors. Treat them well. Bring them coffee. Bring them donuts. It really is a personal thing. And, you'll never be able to say, oh, well, they're just not doing it because they don't like me. They'll just find an excuse and go off and do their own thing. If they like you, they'll bend over backwards and they'll make it happen. And when you're doing an install and you're already behind schedule and everyone's stressed and hasn't slept, be really gracious and courteous because that time really, really does matter. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question. So I've worked in very high conflict architecture offices
Yeah.
and very low conflict, very passive aggressive architecture offices. And I think I'm wondering what advice you have for people starting out in terms of, as you say, dealing with a contractor, typically a more high conflict company culture.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, I had to find a way to do it. How do you suggest that people just be able to set that down at the end of the day and go home and not be like tossing and turning? Because sometimes being nice to the contractor doesn't actually help.
Yeah, yeah. So the question is, how do you deal with a high conflict environment, whether it's your work environment or just an individual on the project? And, it's not easy, and there's definitely not a magic bullet for it. I have a point that's coming up here a little bit later in the presentation about clarity and the importance of clarity and how that can eliminate a lot of drama on projects. So I'll talk about that in just a few. But I truly do think, all of these things combined, these kind of become your compass. You're in charge of yourself. What people do around you, you just can't control. So you just kind of lead through the example that you'd like to see. And as you mentioned, I do think there is a certain amount of you have to set it down and let it go and go home at night and sleep well and not bring it home with you. I think this is something people really struggle with when they start their careers. They just hold it really close and really tight, and they bring all that stress home, and it burns you out, and you're just you're not effective when you're burnt out. So as much as you can, just protect your own well-being. Go to a yoga class. Eat well, sleep. Don't go chain smoke cigarettes when you're stressed out. I mean, there's just like so many things that you have to maintain your own well-being, because the environments are totally unpredictable. So here, I call these the fundamental questions, and I would encourage everyone at every level to always make sure that they ask these questions. Someone has the answer. If they don't have the answer, they should go find it. And everyone on the team should know this. Who are the decision makers? Oftentimes you get stuck in a really vicious game of telephone. And it's really important to know who ultimately makes the final decision. It could be the owner. It usually is the owner. But just know who they are and do your research. Once I know who that decision maker is, ultimately it doesn't matter how many ideas we have. That's the person who's going to sign off on it, and they're going to write the check. I like to know a little bit about that person. Do your homework. Research. What projects have they done in the past that they have been successful at? What do they get inspired by? Where did they just travel? Get to know that person, because that's your relationship there. What are the goals of the project? Simple question, oftentimes never gets asked. What are the goals? Are they just trying to make money? They just want it to look beautiful? Are they trying to do something that they can pass to their children? Is this a legacy project? Really dig into that and understand how you can really connect to those larger goals. What is the scope? The scope is something oftentimes, if you have a role on a project, and you might just be, maybe you're doing a hotel and you're just responsible for the guest room. Don't just get completely, tunnel vision on the guest room. It's really important to know how that ties into the big picture. Is there a rooftop bar? Is there a restaurant downstairs? Is there a spa? What are they doing in the lobby? It helps inform the way you're going to approach that. If they have, food service and it's coming into the room, and you need to make sure that there's an appropriate place for them to eat within their room, that's coming from an external force in. So just know the big picture so you can see how these things all plug together, even if you're responsible for just one smaller aspect. The timeline, super, super important. At the end of the day, most of it comes down to budgets and schedules. And so just what is the timeline? When do you need to do what and by when? Someone should be able to provide that to you. You'd be shocked how many projects get started and no one really knows what the timeline is or what the goals are, and they're just designing, and all of a sudden you're backtracking because you didn't realize that it's not executable within the budget or the time that you have. So if you know the budget and you know the timeline, you're going to make so many better decisions along the way and not have to redo things as much. Any questions on that? Yes.
Do you have any tips for managing client expectations? So if you're new to a design project, they're really excited, you offer some insight on that.
Yes. Super important. And I have a, well, actually, this slide kind of addresses some of that. So So the question is, how do you, set client expectations? And I think this is so important. Your client is not an expert in what you do. That's not their job. They have a check and they want design done. And so you have to teach them your process and set really clear expectations for what you're going to need from them. When will you need their feedback? What is valuable feedback? A lot of people don't know how to give valuable feedback, and I say, I don't like it is not valuable. And I always tell clients that's the feedback needs to come with actionable items. So what is it you don't like about it? Dig into that. And a lot of times it's hard for people to say they don't like something. It's really, really hard for people to say that. And they don't know how to say it. And so they sugarcoat it, or they soften it, or they dance around it. And so inviting them to give you really, really clear feedback that it's useful, so that you also don't just scrap your whole design. Maybe it's just like 2% is off. Maybe they just didn't like this part of it, but you can keep the rest of it. So really, dig into that. A project kickoff, which is, I'm a big fan of a great kickoff, can be internal, so with just your team, and external, including the client and the larger team. That's a great time to just get aligned on all this stuff. So oftentimes I'll put together a project kickoff that leads the client through not only setting expectations, here's our phases, here's what to expect when, but here's what we'll need from you, and here's how you'll engage in the process. Because you can also have clients that get very controlling. They want to tell you how to do your job and what process they're used to from the last project. And so you really want to manage the project in a way that you know is going to work for you and your team. Most issues, it kind of leads into this point, come from misaligned expectations. And I think a lot of them are preventable. So if you think of any conflict in your life, and this can also just be applied personally in your life or in your work setting, it's usually because there are some kind of misaligned expectations. People thought something, I thought I was supposed to do this, but you really wanted me to do that. That's just not having clarity. It's not something that you did wrong. And so this comes up all the time on projects. I'm such a huge fan of clarity eliminating drama. I can't emphasize this enough. It's super simple. It's really powerful. I use it like a mantra every single day. I think about it. Is everyone in this room super, super stupid clear about what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to deliver it? Because that's your highest chance for success. So I'll show you kind of how this comes into work. This is just like building on the clarity thing. So there's these 3 things that you can kind of measure your effectiveness as a leader: is clarity, strategy, and accountability. If you're not clear, you can never hold anyone accountable. So if you're on a team and someone doesn't know what their role is, you can never hold them accountable for not delivering because they were never clear to begin with. So it always starts with that clarity. Then once you have the clarity on what your role is, you can hold yourself accountable. Other people can hold you accountable. The strategy of how you get there is kind of your playground, because I really think when you're leading creatives, you want to create flexibility on how they get there, because everyone has their own unique process that works for them, and you really should figure out what works for you. Don't try to conform to somebody else, because this is creative work, and where someone might need to go really broad and do a bunch of research and go way off the reservation before they get back to their responsibility. I want them to do that. If someone needs to go outside of the building or go get inspired somewhere else, I want them to do that. Someone else might just sit at their computer and just geek out on Pinterest. Whatever it is, that's fine, but that at least you can build a strategy for how you're going to get to the end result. So an example of this is like if your role is to deliver an approved concept, you can build your own strategy around that. Maybe you're going to say, okay, then for me to get an approved concept, I need to present 3 options. I'm going to do that by midweek, so I have time to get feedback, take that feedback into account, modify, and then I'll be able to have one that we can then pursue. And so now the accountability is that by the end of the week, to keep the project on schedule, you're going to deliver this concept. So you can see how that sounds so simple, but if you didn't know that the concept was due by the end of the week, and you didn't know you were responsible for it, and you're just out there just coming up with ideas, you can see how quickly it becomes muddy, and then you're kind of set up to fail at the end of the week. Everyone's looking at each other going, I thought you were going to do the concept. Oh, I thought you were responsible for it. So this sort of thing becomes really useful. And if you are working on a project and there's a design, leader, design director, creative director in charge, always ask them to clarify if you're not sure. Hey, can you clarify my role on this project and what I'm accountable for and when? So another example is just, if the furniture budget on a project is a certain amount, now you're clear on what that furniture budget is. So you can build a strategy then. Okay, well first, I know that I want these statement pieces and I'm going to spend my money here because these are really, really important. And then maybe I can compromise over here, and you will have to make those compromises. Unfortunately, the budgets are a reality. But then you have a strategy to make sure that you're protecting the things that really are going to bring the most value to the project. And then your accountability is you now have been able to select furniture that fits within a budget. It does not work this way a lot of the times. A lot of the times, no one knows what the budget is. They go shop and find all these things they love, and then they realize they can't afford them, and then they just have to go back and then find a bunch of things that they don't love, and at that point they're kind of deflated and bummed, and they've maybe lost a little steam, and there's not then a real clear strategy of how to spend that money. So just, you can see the importance of where that clarity comes in and really helps you to navigate the process more smoothly. So your concept is your North Star. The pre-design work becomes the foundation for the entire project. Get very specific on your concept, because when you're charting the tough waters, this will be your compass to keep you on track. So you can see here the typical design phases of a project. So pre-design, and I'll go into a little more detail of what that would look like, but pre-design is kind of all of the research you're doing to get ready to even come up with a concept. All of those points I was talking about earlier of who is your audience, what are the goals, what is the purpose, what is your budget, all of these things, you're kind of gathering that information, and then you're going to come up with your concept, which becomes kind of that North Star. As you move through schematic and design development, construction documents, construction admin, these are lengthy phases. At those points, it's very easy to get sidetracked and just start heading down this direction. And before you know it, you go, oh my God, like we've all done it. Wow, I'm really, really far off track. So the more specific you can get with your concept, then the more you'll always have that compass to come back to. And like every time I'm delivering a new phase, I'll go back to the concept and go, are we still on track? Are we still like seeing the same thing and doing the same thing, and is everyone still moving towards the same direction? So that's a really important guide, and I'll show you an example of one that I did recently just so you can kind of see like how deep those can go. Yes?
Any like hints or tips on choosing a concept, and even in terms of like, do you know what
a word for it. So the question was hints or tips on choosing a concept and a word for it or a description of it. I think one, do your homework, and this will kind of speak to that of like all of the understanding that goes into how you came up with a concept. Don't just like, oh, all of a sudden I'm really into, you know, millennial pink, so that's my concept, and it has no relevance to this project. You know, it's okay to like things just because they bring aesthetic value, but really know, really do your homework to understand the context and the culture and the history of like, why does this matter for this project? And concepts can have multiple pillars to them. So a concept doesn't just need to be one big idea. It can be multiple ideas as long as they're very specific. And what you name it or how you describe it is just part of the creative freedom you get. It's something that people can identify with and understand. But it doesn't have to be like, my concept is like, you know, cherry blossoms, or like just, it doesn't have to just be one thing. It can be really, it can be layered. So I love this one. And then this speaks to the concept, is not looking at things in isolation. A strong sense of place comes from a deep understanding of the context, the history, the culture, the locals, the audience, their needs and what they value. The time you take to really understand this at the beginning will be just so valuable throughout the entire project. So really take a second, you know, whether it's a week before you really dive into designing the project, if it's 3 days, whatever you have that you can really get yourself oriented. This information is powerful, and then it makes your design so much deeper than kind of superficial. It's not just colors and shapes. It really then speaks to the audience. So I'll show you a project that I did recently. Yerba Buena Island. Are you guys familiar with what Yerba Buena Island, Treasure Island is the island that you drive through when you're going from the East Bay to San Francisco. There's a tunnel right through it. Yerba Buena Island is actually a natural island, and Treasure Island is connected to it, was man-made. And so there's a big development project happening there right now. It's just been launched. There's kind of starting with these luxury condos, so there's going to be a neighborhood there. You can live on this island. You can ferry to San Francisco. There's going to be retail and restaurants and places to hang out, so very cool. Long time in the making. And so I got to come on and do what I call the pre-design work. Before they had announced and hired the design team, I did this work and I deliver it in the form of a book so that everyone who comes in and touches the project has some of these points of orientation to make really informed design decisions. So I just snapped some pages out of it just to show you guys kind of how this can come together. So you have a picture there of the island, so you can kind of see where that is in our landscape and the city right behind it. One of the first things I do is always put together a timeline and go back as far as you can. This was just one half of the timeline. I went back probably about another 100 years, but just what are the key moments in history that have affected this place, this earth, what has shaped it to this point, and so that you're kind of always looking back a little bit before you're looking forward. You can honor the past that way. You're just more connected to what's been happening there. And so one of the really fun things about this island is in 1939, it hosted the World's Fair. And the World's Fair was this giant international expo where they came, and this is actually a picture from that island. So they came and they built all of these architectural masterpieces to really create an expo for the best in architecture and art and design and technology, whatever that was at that time in 1939. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have a way just to tap into these things. So if you wanted to be exposed what was going on a global level, you came to what this would be like a big fair or an exhibit. And this was just a map that I had found in my research of some of the things that happen on that in that fair. And so at that point, one of the big themes of the International Expo was coined Pacific Unity. They were trying to promote peace and international cooperation. So every continent that touched the shore of the Pacific, this idea of Pacific unity, they had an architectural style to represent it. So there was Art Deco, there was Bauhaus, there was Mayan architecture, Romanesque, all of these were represented. So now, as I'm starting to like, okay, this is what's been happening on this island, it's starting to fire off some ideas. Now I'm ready to start thinking about how that might start getting applied to the program or to the concept, because I really want to keep the spirit of that alive. And so then I also found that they had commissioned some really notable artists, Diego Rivera, Salvador Dali, were all commissioned to do these art exhibits. And so then it makes me start thinking, you see on the left here is kind of what some of the research unfolded, and on the right were some of my proposals for how the space could be used. So maybe it makes sense to have some kind of an art residency program or somehow promote the arts on this island, because it does now tie back to the legacy. And then we start looking at the residences. So one of the kind of key parts of this project are going to be the homes. Okay, well, we don't need to be attached to doing it architecturally. We've evolved, and the style we want has changed. But what is the spirit of that fair was about really integrating, or about understanding like the current technology of that time. And so what is current and exciting about technology now, and how can we integrate that into these homes? And so then I started looking at just kind of what is the best in technology in living environments right now, and how does that get integrated? You know, and this was just an example of a picture's a little fuzzy, but of a kind of smart mirror in a bathroom that could be part of this. So you can kind of just start seeing how these things build on each other, and how then those ideas become very rooted and connected to a foundation, and gives you a reason to advocate for this idea, and it makes sense because it's coming from an informed place. And this was just some inspiration imagery for the architecture. So you can see now there's not much out there, so please track the project if you're interested, and you'll see more coming online. But they've just announced the design firms. So they've got, just on this island alone, on this development project, there's Hart Howerton, that's an incredible local firm, BDE Architecture, Meyer Davis doing the interior design. There's Cliff Lowe and Associates, CMG Landscape. So you can see how quickly all of these different design firms are going to come in, and they're all going to take their own approach. But at least now they all have the same foundation to start from, and that information will then inform them all. They might come up with different ways of reinterpreting it, but everyone's kind of coming from the same place. So that's the importance of this work in a project like this. Any questions on that? Yes?
How can we follow that project?
Google. Even I worked on it. I don't get any updates. I every once in a while Google, just a project I've worked on, and oh my God, it's being built, or you kind of forget about it when you work on it really early on. So that project is I just Googled it when I was putting this presentation together. They just announced the design firms. There's not much to see. I think there's a few renderings on their website, but as it unfolds, we'll be keeping an eye on it. It's going to be a big one. So my last point here, take risk and do not be afraid to fail. Failure is such an important part of the work that we do, and I don't think of it as failure. If you're learning from it, and if you're getting the lessons out of it, it's super important. So you have to be vulnerable. Put your ideas out there. Most great ideas start with a no. I started the talk sharing that I had worked on the Bay Lights project. The Bay Lights project was literally two guys who came out of Burning Man, were like, let's put lights on this bridge, and everyone was, no, there's no way. You have to shut down traffic. You have to paint the bridge every year or 2 years. It gets there's no way to paint around it. The lights won't last. You'll never be able to pay for it. There was every excuse under the sun. And that was a sheer just persistence. And, you know, I came on when there were 3 people involved in that project. There's now hundreds of people and a foundation. $8 million was raised privately to fund that project. So the power of persistence and really believing and having conviction in your ideas is really important in the work that you do. Most limitations are just perceived, so just challenge them. Just because it didn't work the first time or it didn't work last time doesn't mean it's not going to work the 2nd or the 7th time. You don't have to get so attached to something you can't let it go, but if you believe in something, advocate for it. You're sitting in a room of people, you'll be sitting soon and amongst a lot of designers, and you know, you throw an idea out and someone kind of like, no, that's not a good idea. You'll hear that all the time, and a lot of times people are just like, okay, and they just move on to the next. But if you really believe in it, it might be worth a second pass, or just reconfigure it or present it in a new way. Come back the next day and say, you know, I know you didn't like this the first time, but I really thought about it. I think it's important for this project. Let's reconsider it. So don't be afraid to be persistent. So by cultivating leadership skills, we're just creating environments where, you know, designers can thrive, clients have more clarity, and I believe projects are more creative, connected, and meaningful. So with that, I will just open it up to some questions. Anyone? Be persistent.
Wait, hold on.
What will you not recommend, but people that are graduating soon, what do you recommend us? Coming into a new studio or architecture field, what do you recommend us to do? Because most of the time we're super nervous, we don't know what to do. Probably we think we don't know anything of what they're talking about. Well, that happened to me when I went into internship.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
So the question is, you know, what is the recommendation for those just entering their career, being new at a firm, and feeling maybe that you don't have anything to offer, or you're, you know, very green. I think, you know, it's good to be humble to the fact that you have a lot to learn, but don't think you don't have anything to offer, you know. You have your perspective, and your perspective is fresh and it's new. And a lot of times, those who have been in it for a long time get set in your ways. And you get set in the ways of the firm. And so bringing in a fresh perspective is always hugely valuable. So I guess my recommendation would be to just know that, and to express yourself, and to be heard, and to bring your voice to the table, and, you know the boundaries. Don't be obnoxious about it, but definitely know that you've invested in years of education, and you have the right and the ability to contribute as much as anyone on a project.
I have a question.
Sure.
So to kind of go along with that question, if you're graduating, you have all these skills, but you have zero experience, how do you set yourself apart from the other candidates? Because a lot of firms are requiring 5 years or minimum experience. So how do you recommend dealing with that for new graduates?
Yes, good point, good point. So the question is, how do you really differentiate yourself or stand out when you're applying for jobs? In many of the positions I've had, I'm in the one who receives the applications, and I just look for something that jumps out, that really highlights how you think about design. I don't care as much about your finished work. You're in school, it was a project. Everyone knows how to use really sophisticated programs these days. I can't even tell half the time if it's real or if it's not. Now I just know it's like if it's a National Geographic project, or, you know, there's like certain ones that get repeated a lot, so I can say, okay, that's, you know, coming from a student. But the finished work doesn't matter. You're not the head of the firm. You're not the like ultimate visionary. So what I want to know is, how do you think about and approach design? And I want to know your process. So show your sketches. Be just like raw and real about it. Take them through a journey, you know, take them through, well, first, you know, I got excited about this, so I went and did this research, and here's me, you know, like doing whatever you do to get inspired, and here's some sketches as I was working out the ideas, and then you get to your final rendering. But if you just have rendering, unless you're just like some masterful, skilled artist, they're pretty much all looking the same. So it really is about like, what's your approach and getting into your mindset. So as much as you can expose that, it's hard to do on paper, but do that in your portfolio. Yes.
I was just wondering if you could speak to how you develop and maintain your network of the people that you know, and how did you go about first fostering that, and then now how do you make sure that you maintain that?
Well, like I mentioned, the relationships are just super important. So I spend time to get to know the people that I work with, and build relationships with the people that I like to work with. Because it's great working with people that you enjoy working with. You work long hours, you spend a lot of time together. So just to maintain that is just, you know, I think certain tools like LinkedIn are super helpful. As you know, maybe as obvious as that is, every time I meet someone interesting, I add them on LinkedIn, because then they're fresh on my feed and on my mind, and if I need to reach out to them and I can't find their email or something, you can always access them. So I build a pretty robust LinkedIn network, but also just, you know, don't be afraid to invite someone out for coffee, or invite, you know, someone to an event or something that you find interesting. If you want to work somewhere and you want to work with someone, reach out to them. They're approachable, you know, and if they're not, fine, you know, at least you tried. But, you know, I've cold called a lot of people and said, I'm just really interested in what you do and would like to get to know you, and generally people are receptive to that.
Yeah, I have a question. What do you think about social media in terms of, you know, going back to the theme of graduating students and looking for a job? What do you think about like having Instagram accounts, or having, I don't know, Facebook pages, or any like websites, and showcasing online your work rather than just sending your portfolio and resume, you know, on websites or emailing to companies? Do you think it matters?
A really good question. So the question is the role of social media. Does it matter having, you know, your Instagram and your website all dialed in? Yeah, it matters for sure. I mean, we're aesthetic people, so I always check what people have online. I think having an online portfolio is really easy for people. You know, it just makes it an easy introduction. You can send a link and they go to your website. But on that website, like I said, it doesn't have to just be finished work. Don't be afraid if you don't have a lot of completed projects. Show just what you're interested in. What are you into? What's inspiring you? What music you listen to? You know, keep it broad, because that, to me, then I can see what you're going to be able to contribute as a person to the project. Just want to work with interesting people who are interested in the world around us. That's how you're going to bring value. So I think it's super important. And you know, expect, if your social media is public, expect that someone's looking at it. And I think Instagram and like a website are the kind of the primary platforms for which people are looking at anything visual. There was one other, I had a thought, it just escaped me, on social media. Oh, Pinterest. Anyone who's been in the field for some time has seen everything on Pinterest. I think Pinterest is like one of the greatest gifts and the worst enemies of design. It's, you know, there's a calculation to it, so it's feeding you things. It's feeding a lot of people the same things. And it's rare that I see any mood board that I haven't seen the Pinterest images. So as much as you can get off the computer and get offline and get inspired elsewhere is super, super valuable. There's a lot that Pinterest doesn't show you. So go to the library, go to, I love going to, there's a great magazine shop in Oakland called Issues that has incredible design publications. I just go pick a bunch up, and you know, comb through and rip out pages and, you know, find your resources. So books, publications, film, fashion. There's so many museums. There's so many ways to get inspired offline. And don't worry if it's then not like this pretty croppable picture. You know, bring it in, pin it up on a board. You can use it internally. And then you'll go find the sexy images that you want to put in your mood board to give to the client.
So when you, as an intern, you always like doing intern for 3 months, so you cannot put the complete project into your portfolio. So how do you know it's time for you to transfer from intern to the designer?
So the question is, how do you know it's time to transition from an intern to a designer? And especially if you don't have a complete project. So you don't have to have a complete project to be a designer. Most don't. I think it's really up to the firm if they offer you a position. When you get an internship, I really look as like that's this kind of trial run for you to show them what you bring to the table. You might not get a seat at the table to really be totally involved in the design process. Some internships are like, you know, organizing the design library or, you know, editing photos or things like that. But just try to show them who you are and be present and engage and build relationships with people. Because almost every firm, if they really like you, they're going to find a position for you and hire you after that internship. And, you know, being quiet in the back corner and just doing the task and no one really knows your name, and at the end of it, they're going, what did you think of the intern? And it's like, I don't know, I didn't really get to interact with them. It's going to be hard for them to offer you a position. But if everyone goes, you know what, they were awesome. They brought coffee, they had a great attitude, they brought a new perspective to things, everyone knew your name, walk around, you know, shake hands. I recently had someone interning at Avrico, never met her, didn't know her name, I'm busy, it wasn't intentional, but at the end, you know, she's in front of me going, so would you like to hire me? And I'm thinking, this should not be the first time that you introduced yourself to me. On the day one, it's a small office, it's all open, you walk up to the desk and say, you know, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to be here, and here's my name, and this is what I'd like to do. So just, you know, make sure your presence is known. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.